We'll then share them with this panel for review. We'll include as an appendix all of the comments we've received from the public, so they will go with the report. And then we'll hold a public hearing for the residents to weigh in also on the plan itself. That public hearing process will probably happen early, I'm going to say late January, early February is what I'm thinking it's going to take. And then at that point, the town board has the responsibility of accepting it and passing it on to the governor for his approval. So that's the process going forward, just so people understand it. And that's the end of my discussion tonight. So I want to open this up. Most of the comments that came in, other than the technical complaints, were about discussion of bias. So I'd like to open that up to anyone that wants to start that discussion. I think in terms of what is bias, right, what do we think bias is as it relates to interaction with the police, and do we see it here in Warwick? And if we do, let's get educated about how do we prevent that. We did mention last week that there was training that our officers are undertaking. We talked about, the chief mentioned part 2 of this training process, which part 2 is implicit bias. 15 of our officers have already taken that training. 15 more are scheduled to take it within the next few weeks, and 8 are scheduled for a little bit later. And in addition to that, I think in February you mentioned, Chief, that there will be 2 officers who will be going to a train the trainer so that we can continue on an annual basis the implicit bias training for our department. So I'll open it up now. Kathy, you have?
I'll try to take this off as you asked. So I had sent an email about this, and I know that when we look at bias, it's actually a part of human nature to have a bias. So it's not when we say somebody is prejudiced or racist. There's really an implicit bias that happens, and many of us don't even know that we're aware of this. So the training, I looked at the curriculum on the website that the police will be going through, and it looks really good because they look at implicit bias. It looks like they pull in a lot of examples, have people look at how their own behavior works. And I think that's great. I think that's going to be a great train-the-trainer. I was wondering, after we talked, and I don't know, you might have mentioned this, do the dispatch also workers get that training? Will they eventually get the training as well? They do. Okay, good. But I also thought that this is something that is really done on an ongoing basis. Implicit bias doesn't just disappear. It really has to be part of a structural or really a focused attempt over a year or over 2 years. And I know our health center, which was founded by 4 African-American women 40 years ago, even in our institution, we're doing the same thing. Every single staff member doesn't just get one training, we're weaving it into every aspect of our work. So I think that it's not putting the finger at anybody saying you're racist, you're doing this. I think it's actually admitting that many of us have bias, and it's good to recognize it. And just one closing thing, I read this book that is really a national reference. It's called Biased, and it's written by Dr. Jen Eberhardt. Many of you might know her, but she's an expert from Stanford University, and she works with police departments all around the country. And one of the things she says is that this bias is a natural thing that happens. It's just, let's recognize it and then do work to do that. But it's a great book if anybody's interested. Sorry for being so long-winded.
So I want to pose a quick question, specifically to the police officer or retired police officers, in reference to bias training. Do you guys and gals, from your experience, when going to these trainings, what was, the overall feelings? Was this something that was, well regarded by coworkers? Was it something that was just, let me check this off the checklist because it's something that's required? Or were there follow-ups with these particular trainings?
So I was a member of the New York City Police Department for 22 and a half years. I did patrol in the Bronx for 12 years, became a detective in the Bronx, and in my last unit was the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. We received bias training, my unit did, because we dealt with the Muslim community a lot. We welcomed it whenever we did our investigations and we were in a Muslim neighborhood or a house. We followed their traditions. We respected their culture. So my answer is that yes, it was very helpful for us, and we welcomed it with open arms. It helped us out a lot.
I need you to say more because that sounds more like cultural sensitivity rather than bias training.
So it wasn't. It was bias training because given that the events of September 11th, the Joint Terrorism Task Force was expanded afterwards. So we were given bias training so that we didn't treat everyone from the Muslim community like they were a terrorist, right? Or they were out to harm Americans. So it was bias training. It was not cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity was part of it, but it was bias training.
So is there anything adverse in regards to the trainings? Like anything negative that you would say or anyone else would say in reference to these trainings that you guys underwent?
I would say no. Nothing negative.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Shawnee Moore. I'm a retired New York City police detective. I spent 20 years on the force. I spent 17 of those years in Internal Affairs Bureau. Every 6 months to annually, we would get notifications in the office that we would have to go to training. And then the complaints started. Why do we have to do this? It's going to take away from investigative time. Oh, it's going to take away from my plans. Oh, the complaints just rolled right in. It was mandatory, and it was cultural sensitivity training for us, because during that time, because I've been retired for some time, there was no such thing as implicit bias training.
Thank you.
So for me, my experience was I would sit, take notes, and be engaged, and there were several others, a handful of officers in maybe a room of 20 or more, that would just sit and numbly absorb, just sit and be in the room and not be willing to participate and get the most out of the training, because it would happen so often and it seemed like it was an inconvenience. So that was just my experience. Like I said, every 6 months to a year, we would go to training, and it would depend on the instructor, on whether or not the instructor was engaging or not. And it was like going to class again for some of the officers, some of my coworkers. Some of the topics that were covered were controversial, depending on what was going on in the time in the city. And some of the topics were things that were reviewed from the previous 6 months. So my experience has been, for the cultural sensitivity training that I went through, that the majority of students or officers that sat in the room were not engaged.
So can I ask you, what would you suggest based on that experience to make it more meaningful?
For training here?
Yeah.
To make it more meaningful, I think,
Or to avoid the situation you were talking about?
we're going to be human. We're going to have the same response, that it's going to take away from whatever our norm is. But if implicit bias training were engaging and had different modalities in the way it was taught, online, in person, interactive exercises, possibly,
Okay.
real-world assessment, and real-life situations that would engage the officers, I think it would have more meaning.
Okay.
And
I also,
oh, I'm sorry. I
also-
was actually going to say something in reference to what you said, Kathy. I think she mentioned, you know, that implicit bias or bias as a whole is just something that we all have. You know, we just have it. You know, and in order to be able to mend that, or in order to be able to, you know, effectively change that, we must become aware.
Exactly.
You know, that this exists. So, you know, if we're teaching implicit bias training that 95% of the police officers are finding it as an inconvenience, you know, we're just checking off a checkbox.
I think 95% is unrealistic.
No, I'm sorry. I was just using that as a you know,
Okay.
exacerbation.
My what helped us, my experience, what made it worthwhile was that it was stressed that there are many biases against police officers, right? And that was a big part of the curriculum for us and for members of the Muslim community who were partaking in the training with us and helping us with the training, that their biases against police need to be brought out and they need to be trained as well. Because along with this whole defund the police and the police need better training that's going on in this country right now, the public needs a lot of training as well. on
Yeah,
how
but
to
that's
deal with the
irrelevant
police.
to Executive
No,
Order
it's not.
203. It
It's-
is.
it's not irrelevant to me.
That's the way. It's not about you right now. It's about Executive
It's my
Order
opinion.
203.
It's my opinion, and I was a police officer for 22 years.
Yeah, but we're here for
So-
specifically Executive Order 203 was a
Right.
mandate by Governor
And the
Cuomo.
community and the
Right.
police have to work together. That's why we're here.
Could I just
That's why we're
say
here.
something that when I looked, I was trying to do my homework, due diligence, looking up what was the curriculum, because I actually developed curriculum training and said, what were they doing now, today, not 10 years ago, but right now. The curriculum that looks like the New York State cops are having to do has changed over the years. And so what they reviewed was that this included implicit bias, it included real-life examples of how we all have some implicit bias. It included how communities, could talk, in a way that was collaborative and working together. But this training had gotten very good results, reviews from the cops and from the communities, the one that's offered now. Now, that I'm assuming it was listed as a New York State training, and I'm thinking that that's the one you signed up for. But it looked like it wasn't what you're referring to in the, 10 years ago. It looks like it's a current training that has really been changed to meet the needs of today. So I would say we need to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
And what
because
I think-
But I think that we need a commitment to change. Like, there needs to be a recognition that there really is a problem and a commitment to understanding that problem and to change. Forcing a training on someone does not guarantee that they're going to receive it for what it is and actually get something out of it. I'm sure all of us have been in mandatory meetings that we had to show up, but that did not mean that we bought into what was being taught. So I think that there needs to be a personal commitment to understanding the issue, as well as a departmental commitment to understanding the issue and moving beyond the issue. And if that doesn't exist, that fundamental interest in understanding the problem, then I think that the rest of it is mute.
Michael, you had asked a question earlier, how do you make the local training better? And I think it really depends on who we're sending as train the trainers, because we've all sat through really boring meetings and really boring workshops. So if the trainer who's been trained, the people who've been trained as a trainer are not engaging and effective, you don't make them the trainers. You need to find someone who will engage the people, work with the curriculum, so the 10% or 15% or 20 or 50% isn't sitting there just checking off the box.
Do you see value in, I'm sorry, David,
No, I was just going to to add, what I'm hearing, which makes a lot of sense from an educator's perspective, are two things. One, it needs to be ongoing, not just a snapshot.
Right.
So regardless of where the learner is, we can take him or her to that next level and continue to provide this ongoing professional development. And then secondly, the efficacy or the presenter's ability to intellectually engage his or her audience. And then I'll add a third, and that would be it needs to be differentiated. So as to your point, not everyone is coming with the same experience. I imagine the training that a new officer would receive compared to maybe someone who's been through different iterations of this might not look the same. So, again, who's presenting it, making sure it's ongoing, and making sure it's differentiated to the officer to make it the most worthwhile of their time and the most engaging.
Okay. Those are all good comments. I'm wondering, do you think, like what Ron did, or maybe Shawnee, maybe we engage somewhere down the line, once we get our people trained and we get to train the trainer and we understand the curriculum, that we engage to have some community members also involved in it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that is helpful, and we could do something like that, right? Okay. Anybody else on the subject?
I just would add one more as an educator. To Kathy's point with the curriculum, that's also a living document. So that curriculum needs to evolve with the times, with different examples that occur, whether the new research is or new thinking, different trends, et cetera. So that's looked at periodically, so that doesn't become stale or in the 20th century terms in a binder saying they're collecting dust, but it actually is relevant to today. So I would add that piece as well. And it sounds like Kathy took a good, strong look at it, but to either peer review it or to have this committee or others take a look at that curriculum, I think that would garner a lot of trust, or more trust, and again, it can be fine-tuned, and perhaps that too can be revised to meet the specific needs of the Warwick Police Department, and depending on which officer.
We're going to share the curriculum with the panel, so we just didn't have it yet at this point for us, so we will do that so that you can also comment on that before we do a final report. Anyone else? Chief, have anything that comments on that at all? You want to make? I think the button's there on this side.
I recognize the difference that they're speaking about between the implicit bias and cultural sensitivity trainings. The first time I took what was actually called cultural sensitivity was probably in the 1980s when I worked for the village of Warwick. We had that training, and I've had it since in other venues, but having only sat through the first part of the current training that's being provided, there were some similarities, but a lot of differences. Now, I haven't been to the second one, which is actually called implicit bias, and I look forward to being able to compare that to the things that they've given us in the past. And I think based on what the officers who've already been through it have said, that it is a completely different curriculum, and most of them were very pleased about it. It was informative, so I look forward to it.
Okay. All right, so the next item I had listed was the use of force policy. That's always an issue. That's kind of what sparked a lot of the discussions that have happened in some of many of the unfortunate incidents. So that use of force policy is on the website for you to take a look at. It's updated. It's in compliance with New York State law, with the changes that New York State made. So I just, what people's reaction to use of force and comments, and particularly, the former police officers, if you have I don't know, I'll just mention, and I think the DA's office probably will do it again, right? At the new police academy in Middletown, they have a simulation where you go into, you see a screen and you're a police officer and you have a fake gun, but you go into a situation and you have to react like a police officer has to react to the situation. It's really eye-opening, and they opened it to the public to take this, and I really urge you do that if you get the chance, because it does put you in the shoes of an officer, and I did do it a year or so ago, and it's eye-opening. So let's, if you have thoughts on use of force policy and in particular, the town's police department,
I have a
let's
question.
hear them. Yes.
If there was a use of force used, can the officers give us how it's investigated afterwards?
Did you read the policy that we put on the website?
I did not.
Yeah, there's a process in place to investigate any type of, are you speaking about a shooting or just a use of force? The state has completely revamped within the last few months what is the use of force. So it's,
Take me from the beginning. I'm an ignorant person. I didn't read the website, and I'm assuming there's a process, but I want to know what that process is.
if the use of force is considered by the police department to be criminal, it goes to the district attorney's office. If the use of force is less than a shooting or a serious physical injury, it's investigated internally by the police department,
By who?
by detectives or eventually by me.
Who would investigate use of force if you were the person using it?
I would have to turn that over to someone else. If you had read the policy, you would understand that, but
I think you're being very vague, and I'm not gonna, I'll go home and
I'd
I'll
be
read the
happy,
policy.
I'd be happy to bring the policy and you can, why don't we postpone the question for a minute? I'll let you read the policy then. You can ask whatever you'd like, if you don't understand the policy.
That's why I'm asking you to explain it to me.
Give it to him.
Mr. Supervisor.
Yeah, I
I'll
mean,
read the policy, but I'm
you
asking
know,
you to
the
explain
issue,
it to me.
right, so the issue is if it's criminal, if there's a shooting, the DA's office is the agency in charge of that, and the state police do the investigations. We don't do that at all. If there's a use of force where, someone is handcuffed or somebody is, injured in being arrested, there's an internal process. So their immediate supervisor, which would be a sergeant on the shift, would begin that investigation. If there's follow-up, the detectives do that investigation. It's then referred up the line through the chain of command to the lieutenant and the chief. Clearly, if the chief's involved in it, then we would more than likely call in the state police. We wouldn't do that investigation ourselves. Does that answer that
It's a
question?
much better answer than I received.
I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. Yes. Somebody else?
Yes. I've perused the use of force policy. That's quite lengthy. It was written by an attorney, by attorneys, correct?
Yes,
Okay. It also says at the bottom that it's a draft.
it is.
Therefore, I'm assuming that it hasn't been adopted by the town board yet as official policy.
No, that's the updates. That's why we're putting them up there. That updates the current policies to the standards that are in place in New York State right now.
Okay. It includes definitions, correct?
Yes.
And I was just confused to certain aspects of the use of force policy. There is an area, page 2, if you have it in front of you. Oh, he has.
George can give it back. Okay.
The definition, if that's what it is, I'm assuming. Perspective. Can you explain that more in detail? And for those who don't have it in front of them, it says, perspective. When observing or reporting force used by a law enforcement officer, each officer should take into account the totality of the circumstances and the possibility that other law enforcement officers may have additional information regarding the threat posed by the subject. I'm a little confused as to what that means. Can you clarify, please?
Well, I'm guessing that what you're talking about is that it would imply that there could be either information that is important to the investigation, that force by the suspect was not to the level of the responding force from the officer, or that the opposite might have been true.
That answers that question. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'd like to say specifically to that, were you gonna answer, Chief? Were you in the middle of answering?
You answered the
We
question.
good?
Okay.
Yes, I'm satisfied with that.
All right, good. So what I get from it, based on my personal experience, I was in 2 shootings when I was a police officer. One is a police officer and one is a detective. And there were things that occurred at the scene that my partner observed, which I was completely oblivious to, because I had tunnel vision, because I was in a fight for my life. So I think that that's pretty clearly stated there, speaking from my experience.
Okay, thank you.
I do have another question.
Yep.
What is the current policy on the carotid control hold? Because as for the policy that's written, it can still be used, but it's limited.
That's-
Why isn't
That's correct.
a carotid control hold prohibited?
It's only authorized when deadly physical force is authorized. Good?
Now, who's authorizing the deadly physical force? The officer engaged in the conduct with the subject and making that split-second determination? Or is it after the fact by the person that's reviewing this action?
If deadly physical force is authorized by law, then the carotid restraint is an authorized maneuver. There's always going to be someone who will, after the fact, analyze whether or not at the time it was appropriate. But if there's somebody fighting for their life and there's nothing else you have left to prevent you from being killed, then it assumes that deadly physical force is authorized, just as if it was any other condition. You're trying to save your own life.
I understand that.
Good?
I
I just
receive-
want to be devil's advocate here.
Right.
And
Go ahead.
try and.
Go ahead. Go
There
ahead.
are other aspects of police engagement that can be used. And if you're fighting, definitely, if you're fighting for your life, you're going to do whatever you can to stop the suspect from continuing in his or her action. Definitely, if you're engaged in hand-to-hand, I'm just gonna put it out there, because we're being nice about it right now. If somebody's trying to hurt you and kill you because you're a cop, you're going to do whatever it takes to stop that person, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Since this is illegal, or since this is a written document outlining police procedure, there could be other restraints and other things one can do besides grabbing someone by the neck, correct? To stop them.
Well, I think we've already established that you're fighting for your life, and
I mean, in
if
a
this
split
is your,
second, you're doing whatever it takes.
if you're getting your head handed to you, and you have a feeling that this person is going to overwhelm you,
Right, overtake
possibly
you.
take away your weapon,
Yes.
or use it against you or someone else,
Been there.
and this is the only choice you have, then it may or may not be the nicest thing, but it's effective under those circumstances, and it's authorized under the law.
Okay. That answers my question. Yes.
Get the mic.
I'm sorry, is this on? Usually I pick it up now. Well, this is the policy for the Warwick Police Department. It tracks Article 35 of the penal law pretty explicitly. So while it's a policy, it also has as its foundation what the law dictates. Now, I don't mean to sound too nuanced about it, but it applies a reasonable person's perspective. So I brought this, I thought it was, useful. The definition of deadly physical force means physical force which, under the circumstances in which it is used, and therein lies the reasonable person.
Right.
So while these things are generally reviewed after the fact from a stand-back perspective where you can take in all of the elements of what was happening at the time, what ultimately happened, the circumstances under which it is used is measured from the viewpoint of a reasonable person in the position of a police officer under these circumstances. So if you're met with deadly physical force, while we all don't necessarily want a police officer or anyone else always combating deadly physical force with deadly physical force, if there are other options, but the law permits the use of deadly physical force, whatever form that may take, whether it's a carotid hold, gouge somebody's eyes out with your finger, it's deadly physical force can be met under the law appropriately with deadly physical force. So it is that reasonable person standard. I mean, you've been a police officer a long time, you understand, what that means. Is it always desirable to engage at that level? No, certainly not.
But there are circumstances where it's necessary. My issue
Yes.
is this specific type of physicality. And even though it is permitted by law, we can still augment it, refine it, change it, no?
Yeah, no
To-
question. Yes.
No, why?
Change the
Why would you
wording.
need to change it? Why?
Well, no, let me just say, there's no question. You have what the law permits.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily always mean that a policy will go to the extent of the law. The policy permits it to be coextensive with what the law permits, but under a particular circumstance, it wouldn't necessarily have to.
So, very quickly, just for the people that are non-cops or don't really, ever experience, what you guys go through, and not to speak based on metaphors or fake examples, just want to be clear, like George Floyd, putting a knee in his neck, this is not allowing that. You guys would agree that, or Eric Garner, the way that Eric Garner got choked, is that okay? Is that reasonable force to be used?
No reasonable person would have found that that was appropriate under those circumstances.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to be clear,
Yeah,
for,
I don't- yeah,
to understand that.
That's that's not a that wasn't a close case. That's not a nuanced case. That's your immediate guttural reaction is, whoa,
That's
So,
excessive.
yeah.
Right.
Right.
I think what happened, if you want to bring up what happened to George Floyd, I think that 99.9% of police officers, active or retired in this country, can agree that that was disgusting and it was completely uncalled for, and it was completely against everything that dictates what we do. So there's no question. There's no question there.
Just wanted clarification.
Yeah, no, there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. The use of force continuum dictates the amount of force, right? So with the use of force continuum, you say that the suspect dictates the amount of force that the police officer uses, correct?
I'm sorry, you're asking me if
The use of force, you know, right, because you were a detective, you were a police officer. The use of force continuum dictates that the suspect dictates the amount of force that is used by the police. You familiar with the use of force continuum?
yes, I am.
Okay.
And the officer responds to whatever that suspect is initiating.
Right, so
And
you
there
go
are different
from,
levels and different tactics
yep,
that are in the officer's tool belt to utilize.
yep, yep,
My issue with especially the carotid control hold, as it specifically states, that's one extreme that's listed, that's here, that's that's a part of the use of force. But there are so many other variations and so many other different tactics. Why aren't they included, and why isn't this excluded?
I can't speak for the policy of the police department, but the chokehold, right? We
Yes.
want to call it what it is the gaslight for the whole country right now, right? That's the terminology that everybody's addressing in their use of force policies around this country, right? Because of what happened specifically to George Floyd. But you can't tell a police officer under no circumstances you can't use the chokehold because, like the chief said, if you're fighting for your life and the only thing you have left is to grab this person and put him in a chokehold to make sure you go home at the end of the day to your family alive, then you can use it, right? And a reasonable person, once they look at the case or whoever wants to look at it and Monday morning quarterback it, they can say, hey, it was either this or he was gonna die. He or she was gonna die. So I think that's why it's there.
I understand why it's here. I don't agree with it being here.
I
That's
do.
my issue.
I agree with it.
Because there are other tactics that an officer can use. Because I'm not gonna tell you, I'm 5'6" and 100 so many pounds.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So, I patrolled housing. Police, I was a housing cop on patrol.
Okay.
Housing police officers patrol by themselves.
Yep. I lived in the
So there've
projects.
been
I
many
know.
a time
Yeah.
that I was in different types of confrontation.
Right.
And there are many a time that I've been on my ass because someone decided that they wanted to be the super aggressor.
Yep.
Not once did it click in my mind to use a chokehold.
But that's you. You can't.
Now, I agree. You were giving examples of your experience as an officer.
Right.
I'm speaking of mine.
I never said I used the
And
chokehold.
My point is that there are other tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are other tools in the toolbox. And yes, the chokehold or the carotid control hold is legal, but there's a number of different tools in the toolbox. That's all I'm saying. And I just want to make the panel aware that there are other things that can be utilized.
I think.
And in a life and death situation, you don't know exactly how you're going to react.
That's the
except
point.
To be primal.
That's the point.
So you're doing.
Every
you're
situation is different.
Let me finish. You're falling back on your training as an officer and your physicality as a person, and then the survival instinct kicks in. So you're taking all of that in that split second, split minute, that minute seems like hours, to respond and take control of the situation and stop the aggressor, because that is the ultimate goal.
Right.
To stop the aggressor.
Yep.
And to gain control of the situation so that the person doesn't harm you, kill you, or kill anyone else.
And
Yes,
size, yeah.
exactly.
And size is irrelevant because
Absolutely.
because I'm
Size is
6'5" and I'm 290 pounds,
Right.
and I got my ass handed to me by someone who was 5'5" and probably $120 who was on PCP,
irrelevant. Exactly.
and he beat me like I
So-
was a child.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to
every
make everybody
situation
aware.
is different.
Absolutely. I just want to make everybody aware that there are different tactics, and I know law enforcement, you know and understand that there are different tools in the toolbox available. Why this one? That's my issue. Why this one?
Well, we certainly agree that it's not the best choice ever, but the confusion between the carotid hold and a choke hold is where,
Application.
exactly, it's a matter of the application. When it isn't applied properly, instead of the pressure being on the sides of the person's neck and reducing the blood to their head, which makes them woozy and eventually unconscious, if the arm is across their throat or in their mouth or something that's restricting their breathing or their inability to breathe, that's the difference. A chokehold restricts breathing. The carotid
Restricts.
technique, when applied properly, cuts the blood flow to their head, makes them eventually unconscious, which is the end result. That's the intended result. Sometimes when it's applied improperly, you get a result that was not intended, and I think that's the whole argument that we're talking about. And you're right, there's other things you can do, but when it's
Life or death.
when it's
you
life or
turn to
death
what
and it's you or me,
can.
we're gonna figure it out our own way, and it's authorized, so. Not the best choice always, certainly not used very often, but it's there if needed.
Okay, so your point, your point is well taken. I mean, that there are other methods, and we'll look at that in terms of if there's things we want to add to the policy or not. We do. Is that it? Okay?
That's fair.
Okay.
Yes.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Anyone else on that issue that wants to talk about it?
I'll just add one thing.
Yes, sir.
I think one thing is there may be a tendency to feel like it is a safer alternative than it really is. I'm reminded of tasers. People often think, oh yeah, you can just tase someone, it's no big deal. And in reality, that can be a very dangerous situation. So I don't know if that's a training question or if it's, I don't know how you handle that, but I think there could be a tendency to think, well, I'm not using my weapon, so this is a safer option. And statistically, maybe it is, but still very dangerous. So I think that would be something to consider along with, as it's discussed, as yes, this is an alternative to using a weapon, but still very dangerous and potentially deadly.
Before we equipped our officers with tasers, I was part of getting tased, and I'll tell you, it's one of the most painful things that ever occurred. But there's plenty of stories of where the taser does not take the person down. So again, we do understand that sometimes you do other things, right? All the officers know that as well. All right, anyone else on that subject? Good points made, appreciate that. The next thing I had listed was de-escalation and conflict resolution, and the training that goes into that. I know our officers have taken both of those training subjects, but what's your thoughts about de-escalation and conflict resolution? What do you think we could do better, maybe? What situations, what kind of, I don't know, outreach we could get to maybe improve on that?
Does this include mental health issues too, or is that separate?
We
That's
could
gonna be
combine
separate.
it. Mental health was a
Yeah.
big, that was one of the second sort of topics that we
Yeah.
got. And I explained at the very first panel meeting, again, that mental health is run by the county. They don't have enough money in it that they should have. We work very well with mental health. And I think maybe it was Kathy, you
Yeah, I
sent me a
sent
note
you,
that
yeah.
the former commissioner of mental health
Right.
had mentioned how well Warwick's department had interacted
So,
with that.
right.
So if you want to talk about it.
He's, Chris Ashman is the former Orange County Commissioner of Mental Health, and he sits on my board, and he mentioned how, I had told him, we had talked as the board, what I was doing and representing, and one of the things they said, he had said was this is really a key area that, when we're getting more and more isolation, people experiencing depression and other things related to COVID, and a lot of the stresses people are going, domestic violence, and this crosses race, this is really for everybody, how do police officers respond to those calls? And it is, you can't send social workers out, but is there a need for, maybe on the county level, to ask for more money to support the police officers in these kinds of calls? Because I know in our community, we had a young person who spoke English, but there are people who speak only Spanish, and just in general, there is an increasing need. So it may not be a problem that we in Warwick can solve internally, but it could be something that we say, look, if the police officers are working well with somebody from the mental health group, whether it's a peer or somebody else, can we really look at increasing funding from the county level? Now, there's no county officials here probably, but Chris Ashman, as the former commissioner, said this was important. He also offered to support Warwick in any way, even though he lives in Goshen, but he said he'd be willing to support us. So, you know, and he worked a lot with his police force. But I think that is critical, especially in this time of COVID with all of the mental health stresses that we're experiencing.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I mean, in the last meeting, the chief mentioned, I think it was a pretty good point, was like, we get a call, we don't know exactly what it is, right? And it's our police department that's the first responders, and then they, in that short period of time, have to assess what this is about. So then that's where the de-escalation training, I guess, kicks in, and if we need to call mental health, we call mental health, right? Yes, Lou.
This is one area where community policing can be very effective. I recall an incident where we had an EDP, a young man that I knew from 6, 7 years old, but now he's like 17, 18, he's 6'7", and he weighs 250. He's on medication, and sometimes he doesn't take the medication and he goes off. Now, anybody walking into that situation blind, they're gonna take him down and take him down hard because he is a threat. The fact that I knew this kid, I could go in and talk to him, sit him down and say, listen, it can be hard or it can be easy. You know me, calm down, and let's do this the right way. I don't want to see you get hurt. The fact that I had a relationship with him and I could go in and talk to him made all the difference in the world. Because if NYPD had gone in there and they see this 6'7" giant kid foaming at the mouth, they're going to hurt him and hurt him bad. And that's where community policing comes in. You know the people that you're dealing with, you know how to deal with them, and it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, I know, like, our department, we know a lot of the, we do know a lot about the people that live here, right? We do interact with them a lot, so we do know where there are residents like that, right? But how do we maybe improve that? How do we expand that? I don't know, ideas?
Does dispatch flag like these locations? Like I knew in my sector, we had an address that came over, and it came over 15 times a week, right? And it was always the same person. So the dispatcher would tell us, hey, you know, 48 George, you know, you got to go to 800 East 180th Street, apartment 5G. You already know what's going on there. It's the same thing. You know, be careful. Do you guys flag them?
Yeah, the dispatchers are pretty good about that. Most of the time, if the dispatcher actually recognizes the address as being a location or puts the address in as she's getting ready to send the call out, lots of times they'll ask the police officer just to landline the station, so they don't put the sensitive information over the radio that everybody with a scanner can listen to. But gives the officer a heads up that, you know, we've been there like 6 times this week already, something's really wrong. Back off a little when you get there, you know, assess the situation, we're not really sure. You know, and they're pretty sharp with keeping the cops abreast of what's going on.
Anyone else? So we all need to lobby the county for more mental health, right? More response teams.
With some COVID money, there may be some extra money for mental health that we should keep our eyes on.
All right. The last time the issue of accreditation came up, there are accredited agencies in New York. We are not one, although I think we have pretty high standards. What's everyone's feeling on accreditation? Is it something you think is valuable for us to pursue? Do you think, I mean, it does take a lot of administrative time, and, you know, we are a department that's, you know, limited. We don't have excess staff. Do we think that's important enough that we devote staff to do that, or we incur more tax payments to do that? What are people's feelings? Anybody have any thoughts?
Accreditation is not easy.
Right.
It's a very difficult process. You were with housing. I don't know if you were there when we went through the accreditation process, but it involves everything in police work, from the paperwork, from incident reports, patrol guide. It involves everything, and it has to be up to a certain standard that meets the federal standards. It's not easy. Very few departments are able to achieve it. NYPD, one of the biggest in the world, they never were able to achieve it. I'm going to wave my flag for housing. Housing was the only police department that was able to achieve accreditation. They didn't get much credit for it, but they did. It's a difficult process. Is it worth it? I don't know.
I'm just wondering, in the, you know, the times of limited funding, is it better to put more into community outreach or improving some of the policies and training? I don't know.
Is there a benefit to the community or the police to be accredited?
I don't know if there's any, do we get any kind of kudos for that, Chief, for being accredited? No, I mean, I guess it's to send a message that we've reached certain standards, but we can reach the standards without actually going through the process of getting accredited, right? But again, I'm open.
Well, like I said, NYPD, one of the biggest departments in the world, was not able to achieve it. It's very difficult to achieve accreditation from the federal government. It involves a lot of resources. We had to establish a separate unit just to get it done. I don't think you'll ever be able to do that in a small police department like this.
Okay. Johnny, you had a comment?
Harriman Police Department has been accredited since 2012. Middletown Police Department has been accredited since 2007. Cornwall has been accredited since 2005. Monroe since 2001. New Windsor since 1996. Warwick, Freudian slip. Woodbury has been accredited since 1994. And if we want to count them, the Orange County Sheriff's Office has several different accreditations. And accreditation, to me, for our small town police department, I think is something worth pursuing, because it's an acknowledgement that our police department has met those standards. And it's an acknowledgement to the community that our police department is dedicated to at least pursuing that effort of being accredited. And once we're accredited, you can maintain accreditation, and you can be a part of the accredited association with the other municipalities who are accredited as well. I see it as a benefit.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on it?
I know I recognize the advantage of some accreditation, but this case, I'm not sure. I look at a finite budget. If we have a budget of X number of dollars, would it be better to use it for training, for community involvement, for developing, trying to recruit kids to be considering police, criminal justice careers? I just think I know that in this time of limited budgets, I'm just not sure. How much does it cost? You know, I'd kind of like to know the nuts and bolts. What does it cost to do what does it cost to do the thank you. Accreditation, I'm tired. Accreditation, what the benefit is, and then on the other side, what could we use that money for? And also staff, you know, time. Is it better to have the cops out and work with community members and other things? I don't really know the answer.
I just believe that accreditation would signal to the community that level of excellence that may encourage recruitment and may encourage the fostering of more people trying to be a part of the department, because it says that we've reached a certain standard of excellence, and I think as such, more people would want to be a part of it. So I think in itself, it would answer a few of these questions that we're wrapping our heads around whether or not we have the funding to pursue.
One last thing, please. As I stated before, accreditation is a difficult process, and it takes a lot of man hours and manpower. Am I against accreditation? Absolutely not. It would be a good thing. But with a limited police department, limited manpower, it's going to take away from patrol. It's going to take away from just about everything that you guys do. And for that reason, I don't think it's doable for the Warwick Police Department. I know other small departments have done it, but that's my opinion.
Okay, I know we are one of the busier departments in the county too, in the number of calls and responses we get. So we'll weigh that. We'll weigh the pros and cons. Another topic that had come up was community engagement. What do you suggest what more? We talked about some of the things that we tried to do in the community. You know, the child safety seat things we've done. I know some officers came to the get-together at King's Estates. You know, we get involved with different charity events. We interact, obviously, during the festivals and things like that. What else do you think? Are there ideas you have that?
I have a question or a suggestion,
Yes, sir.
and I don't know if it's being done. It could possibly be already in place. I would be interested myself. I'm the father of a teenage boy, right? And I also have an older son who's in the military. A big part of when things go wrong is on car stops. If we could have a workshop with the local police, with Warwick Police, with kids who are of driving age, to do a car stop workshop, like a mock car stop, where the police, you know, can approach the vehicle, they can act as they would normally act, and then we can take lessons learned from what occurred on the car stop in a controlled environment, and then look at it and teach the kids what they should or should not be doing, and teach the police officers how to better handle, you know, things that are associated with, you know, a culture, driving around with a hoodie on, or driving around, you know, with their buds in their ears and not hearing things, or things like that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, part of like a driver's ed type of thing where the police would be involved. I think it would help
Yeah.
everybody.
You know, the Warwick, and I'm so sorry, I'm trying to remember which officer had come to the Alamo. You know, we had a bunch of teenagers, and we also asked them to come and talk about, just in general, this was like, you know, several years ago, and then Katie has come back to repeat it, but it's, you know, how do you stay clear of trouble, and how do you make sure you're doing the right things, and just basic, you know, and I think it was helpful until they started asking about the taser gun and how they got all excited about the taser gun. But I mean, they wanted to know how that was used. But I think the idea was that it was really a good exchange for these teenagers, because they got to talk to the cop about what they should be, you know, kind of what things they should be looking out for. Also, with drinking and driving, you know, this is a big issue, making sure that even though they have MAD and other things, really working with teenagers, I think, is critical about drinking and driving and how this can destroy lives. I mean, I think all those things are part of a good, response to community.
Michael, I would add just to remind everyone, because it's somewhat still new, we have a police officer at every school in the district now, and that's significant. So they're cultivating relationships, they're interacting with students, whether it's out in the playground or sometimes assisting with certain lessons. So that's been in place now for about 3 years in every building. Historically, we had one always at the high school where their role can look a little bit different, obviously, than it would in an elementary building. But it's been very, very successful, and I think it's gone a long way with the community. Prior to Parkland, when we would add an officer, folks would ask questions, wonder why, but since Parkland, I think they understand that just the presence of a police vehicle and someone on school property who is armed and has an expertise in that area can be a deterrent. But moving to the community engagement piece, whether it's interacting, with families in the morning, helping to direct traffic, or just helping students, solve a problem, I think it's really going a long way to cultivate those relationships.
Years ago, when we first put police in the schools, people would call the station and say, "What are the cops doing at the school?" Now, when the cop's not there, they call up and say, "Where the hell's the cop?" So the mindset has changed a little bit. We have police not only in Dr. Leach's schools, but also in the Florida School District and in the Greenwood Lake School District. So the program is very well received on all fronts.
And the expansion of that came out of the Parkland issue. If everybody remembers how horrific that was, right? And the schools, all of the schools there's Warwick, Florida, and Greenwood Lake, quickly took the recognition that they wanted some assistance to keep the children safe. It was a top priority, and we commend them for that, and we're glad to partner with them. And then they've made their own improvements, obviously, to secure their schools as well. But any other thoughts on community outreach?
Just one last thing. If you look at TV, you would think the police were working every minute of every hour, responding to calls and whatever. Not true. Police work can be boring. There are many, many hours during a tour where there's absolutely nothing going on. Those hours, I think, can be spent productively getting out of that patrol car, frequenting the local businesses. The school officer thing is perfect. That's great. But that time could also be utilized in other areas, visiting senior citizen centers, getting out on foot, walking, the senior developments, etc. Utilizing that time, not just sitting in the car waiting for a call.
Okay, very good. Any other thoughts?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I know you're probably getting tired of hearing my voice.
No. Are you kidding?
I do. I have a question. Is there a civilian body or members of the community or a part of the town board that investigates other types of complaints against officers? Like a civilian complaint review board, you know what I mean?
We
Or is
don't.
it just
We don't have a civilian complaint review board, and I don't know. We looked back the last 2 years. We don't have any complaints against the police department that we can document. There have been times when someone's come to me, Pastor Ralphie, who does a Spanish ministry at the Dutch Reformed Church, came to me wasn't about the police. It was about a local business interaction with a young man. And I asked the police to look into that to try to figure out what was going on, and then they did successfully. So complaints come to my office. They get made directly to the chief on occasion, but we haven't had any documented complaints for the past 2 years against the police department. Now,
Is that a part of public record?
yes, ma'am. So, and, you know, we've put the complaint forms on the website. Maybe we'll get more, I don't know. But I always argue that we do have a civilian complaint board. It's your elected officials, right? We are elected by you to represent the residents in the town of Warwick, myself and 4 other town board members. Any issue can be brought to us. And it is our duty and our responsibility to investigate those, and if there is wrongdoing, we will correct that. That's our job. That's what one of the things you hire us to do. So we don't, I personally am reluctant to put a non-appointed board in between that process, because you have recourse against me.
So I agree to a certain extent. I think that I have the level of comfortability, I guess, to reach out to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that, you know, that from my end, you know, I do it with Mayor Newhart, I do it with you, I do it with Lieutenant Rader, but I don't think that that's the case with many other people. You know, I think that there's a lot of people that do not have that, you know, level of comfortability to reach out to a town supervisor, and they would prefer a board of citizens to represent, not necessarily represent, but, or yeah, represent them. So I just my 2 cents in reference to that matter.
I appreciate it. I mean, but again, you understood how it works, and you've done it, and you're not the only one. I talk to people all the time. I'm in my office all the time. The mayor's in his office all the time. We welcome citizens to come in, and we take our job seriously, you know. And I know today people get jaded about politics, right, with the craziness that we live in, but we take it seriously. We're elected by you all to represent you in a town and a village that we love, and so we will do our duty. And I think the citizens have a responsibility. If there's an issue, bring it to us. And I'm happy to follow up on it.
So,
and it's all public record. When every email that's been sent to me is going to be part of this public record.
I think that you're absolutely right in that aspect, in the way that you're, you know, conveying that thought. You know, but I think that there's much more to that, you know, and I think that part of the mandate, you know, talks about, you know, certain groups and certain communities being disenfranchised and not feeling that level of comfortability, you know, and I think that, you know, why, you know, as an elected official and as a group of leaders, why not create that level of, I wouldn't say transparency, because you are very transparent, but that level of outlet or that channel where we are incorporating other individuals that may not feel that level of you know, I don't think that there's necessarily a lot of resources being, you know, spent on, you know, in creating something where we, the community, want to be more involved. Specifically, you know, through you guys, the leadership, you know, that's my 2 cents in regards to that.
Thank you.
As I was reading this, I have to be honest, I haven't read the whole document, the governor's document, but I do, you know, I see a lot of great examples of how community can get involved and support the, you know, kind of the things that have to be done as far as community engagement. They don't always have to be called a board, though. I think it's more of a, you know, a community engagement council group, whatever, but it really speaks to this idea of Warwick always being trying to pull in people from the community, and this would be a way of actively, intentionally gathering people to help with maybe advanced training or even who knows what else. But I think that idea of the community engagement with some kind of group, whatever you call it, with, and I would hate, I wouldn't put you up on a you know, to be kind of up at the front. I would put it in a circle so that people would feel like they were part of a group together. You know what I mean? That you would be together. But anyway, but I think that would be an important way to deal with.
Well, I suggested in the first meeting that I think Shawnee and the Reverend were at, which was just a group of citizens that came to me about executive order. It wasn't part of this process, so we don't want to make sure there's no secret meetings. But I think one discussion we had was, we used to have a group called the Quality Communities Group, right? And it was made up of citizens from all around Warwick, and they focused on zoning at the time because that was the issue. We were getting overpopulated. What do we do? How do we save the farms? That's a great kind of vehicle where you could do that, and they would meet, I don't know, quarterly, and you could bring in the police department, you could bring in other departments in the town to sit and listen and bounce ideas off of the community. So I'm open to that. I mentioned that in that first meeting, so I don't have a problem with that at all, and it's probably a good idea.
And I also just want to add, I don't want to obviously undermine anyone. I think that Warwick is, an example community, in many ways. I enjoy living here, enjoy the town. So I just want to be, very clear that those are not, my intentions. But, at the same time, I do think that, there's people out there that are not engaged, under whatever reasons. It could be it could be a reason of their experiences with local officials back where they're from, or negative adverse feelings that they had with policing in the past, and may, use that as a reasoning or as a why they're, have that resistance in this particular community. So I think that, who does that fall on, right? Does that fall on the individual, or that went through those situations, or do that, so, and awareness, obviously, becoming aware that these type of communities and people exist within our community, and getting ahead of those particular examples can possibly create Warwick in being the archetype or the model community that figured it out, and so forth. So yeah, just being optimistic about it.
Just one question on that. And I agree with a lot of great points here made today, but at some point, I think we also have to agree, you have to take responsibility for yourself. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
these particular groups that we're talking about, at some point, we all have to pull ourselves up by our boots, right, bootstraps, and make it happen. So I understand, but at some point, you all got to admit to ourselves, we can't fix the world. We have a very good town, an amazing police force, an incredible community, and I think the other things we have to take out of this is we should focus on the good here, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? It shouldn't be all negativity here. This is all good stuff. The fact that you can even have this meeting tonight is saying a lot about the community.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Well, I mean, granted that also it's an executive order that's mandated. Not undermining anything. Just, we have to also be realistic of the matter. And, I think that historically, there is a history of issues not specifically within Warwick, but within, New York, specifically within policing, housing, redlining, steering. These are all issues that have happened within our country that has prevented particular groups of people from, being better, or, being in a position that, could be better. So when we do, I agree with you. I'm an American that, I'm a first generation American. My mom came to this country, and she came to this country and pulled herself, up, alone, a single mom. So I'm with you in regards to that matter. But we also have to, self-reflect. We also have to look at the atrocities and the issues that, have happened to a specific group of people, and actually, understand that those type of things occurred, and not pretend as if that's not part of, our history.
The thing that we have to take, and I said this in the first meeting, the very first meeting we had, I think we got to be careful to not put Warwick in the whole, climate of what's going on in this country right now, because it's not happening here. This is not Bushwick, Brooklyn. This is not the South Bronx. This is not Chicago. This is not Detroit. I don't see as a taxpayer.
Who are you speaking
I don't
to?
see.
Who are you speaking
As a
about?
Puerto Rican who was raised by a single mother who's here as well.
How many PBA cards do you have, if I may ask?
I don't need it. I have a retired ID.
Exactly.
Right,
You know,
so-
you're proving my point. So
No,
my,
I'm not.
My
No,
point,
I'm not. My point is that we have to be careful, right? Because if he just said that we have no complaints, why would, as a taxpayer, I don't want to put my tax money into funding a civilian complaint review board when there are no civilian complaints. It doesn't make sense.
I just told you why there's a possibility on why there isn't any complaints.
So where would that money come from?
I mean,
And why does it have to be, or why does a resource only have to be monetary? I'm a volunteer with this panel. I'm not getting paid.
so am I.
Yeah, so am I.
Nobody on this board except the elected officials that earn a salary. Nobody's getting paid. The officers are
Well,
hired officers.
I don't think that you
But
would want somebody
expand.
making, I don't think you would want
Sorry.
somebody making decisions on civilian complaints that are not being held accountable, that are not trained, that are
But
not
who said
paid. They should be paid.
Right.
But
Where
I
are you
don't-
going to get the
Or
money?
maybe not.
I don't
It
think that
depends
they're
on the-
making decisions about the complaints. I think what they would be doing is highlighting those complaints. You said that this is not the South Bronx, this is not Chicago, this is not those places.
Right.
However, citizens who have had their beginnings in those places
Yep,
are
like
now
me.
residents of Warwick.
Like me, yeah.
Which means that they have brought all that they have lived
Mm-hmm.
to the experience.
Right.
And so if they felt marginalized in those places, it takes a lot for them to not feel marginalized in the new place. And so
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we have not had any complaints in the past 2 years sounds good. But then when you think about the fact that if you have to complain, you have to go to the police department in order to get the paperwork to make the complaint, it sounds kind of intimidating to one who has already been marginalized. So yes, we have an excellent police department, but if I don't know that, and I have an experience of being on the margin, and I have an experience of being voiceless,
In your
it-
experience,
there needs to be somewhere that I can go and have a space
Okay.
at the table
If
in
you're-
order to bring my issues.
in your
And-
experience,
oh.
people who are marginalized or people who feel this way, do they just keep it to themselves or do they share with their neighbors, their pastors? Do they share it with, because I know in my experience, people come to their community leaders for guidance, right? People that look like them, people that are part of their culture, if they feel marginalized, and they express themselves to them, and then they go and they run with the ball and they help take action. Because anyone who is truly, truly wronged in their life by someone, I don't care where you come from, you go, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and you go and you make a complaint or you say something about what has occurred, or you tell somebody.
That is the
Can
hope.
I just, so,
But it is not always the reality of the situation.
Absolutely not. Nothing is absolute except math.
can I just interject? So I think what I've experienced in 19 years here is getting that message out, whether it's through connections we've had with pastors. I was in business for 40 years here. People, I have an open door, right? And the mayor does. There are many times when people have come to either one of us. Now, they may have had an issue with the police, but they come to us. And then we follow up on that. So I think we have a framework here, right, that's kind of worked. We've made it a little easier now because we've put the complaint forms on the website. So those complaint forms can now come in and there's a record, right? They don't have to go to the police department to get them. So I think we're getting to that progress. And I think the idea of this Quality Communities group is a great idea. I think I'd like to pursue it with all of your help, if you're willing to volunteer, as you've said. And I think we can build on that, so, all right? Does that make sense? Does it sound like it makes a little sense? All right, any other thoughts before we try to close up? And I just want to point out, I made the mistake of scheduling this on the night of a Village of Warwick board meeting, so the mayor did not leave because he was upset or mad or He went to his village board meeting, and I thank George McManus for staying here and missing the meeting to be part of this. Again, I want to thank all of the panel members. Great ideas and discussions tonight. It's all documented. If you go to the Town of Warwick's YouTube channel, you can follow through comments that were made. You can review this, so you can, if you have any further thoughts, get them to us. We're going to try to coalesce all this information together. I'm going to get it out to you for your thoughts again. You can review, you can add additional comments to it, and then maybe at that point we'll bring everybody back to go over that before we, try to formalize a plan of sorts. Does that sound fair to everyone? All right, thank you very much. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving and a safe Thanksgiving. All right, and stay healthy. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned.